the thing that killed probably, I think that I disliked most working as an engineer at tech is like the daily stand-ups where you have to explain what you did yesterday and what you are going to do the day before, because I really don't work that way. I don't
Yeah,
work in a way where there's something that I had something to say about yesterday. Sometimes I just have
yeah.
nothing to say. I didn't do anything. I wasn't feeling inspired. And that's, I understand companies. Like, I mean, it's hard to manage a business, a company or a team where people just work when they're inspired. Like, how do you know when things are
Yeah.
going to get?
Today's guest is Daniel Vassallo. Daniel is the creator of the Small Bets community, which counts more than 5,000 members and includes engineers, entrepreneurs, and creators of all kinds. He's also a former software engineer at AWS. He's the author of The Good Parts of AWS and creator of a successful Twitter course. With Daniel, we will talk about his unconventional journey in tech, the small bets philosophy, and advice for engineers about careers, side projects, technology, and skills. So let's dive right into it. Hey, Daniel, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hey, Luca, good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure. So, we have had many guests on the show who are engineers, managers, CTOs, and I have to say that oftentimes those people were from big tech, right? So, the likes of Shopify, Netflix, Twitter. And I feel sometimes that we as engineers fall into this trap of thinking that the best careers can only happen either in big tech or in high growth VC backed startups, you know? And so the reason why I'm so happy to have you on the show today is that because you provide such a fantastic counter example. Because you started in big tech in AWS, but at some point you did something else, right? So uh, I would start just by asking you to tell us a little bit about your journey so we set the right context for this chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think probably was always since the very beginning thinking that probably eventually I will be doing something on my own. I think I always had that sort of motivation in me. Nevertheless, probably what happens to me and probably what happens to many people is when I started my career, I joined big tech. I worked in a couple of small startups before, but then I got hired at AWS. They were treating me well. I was getting paid really well. I was given lots of opportunities to work on various different things. I kept getting promoted.
Yeah.
Things were looking good, and sort of subconsciously you start thinking nothing is going to beat this. Certainly not financially. Certainly not with sort of predictable paths for continued growth, both again financially and from sort of climbing the career ladder, so to speak. So I fell a little bit into that trap for a few years
Mm.
where I felt like, I shouldn't be even considering something else. But then, sort of long story short, at one point, happy to talk more in detail about this, right? But long story short, I think I realized that a career as a full-time employee just wasn't right for me. Probably the same things I was feeling in the beginning, and I started to feel, look, I just, it's wearing me out, having to ask for permission, to ask for something, to do something, having to work on other people's terms, having
Yeah.
again to ask for permission to take a couple of days of vacation, like having to work on purposeless stuff, right? Which
Yeah.
was, believe it or not, well, at least I thought was purposeless. Maybe for others, they thought it wasn't, but that was basically eating me out from the inside mentally, probably even physically. And at one point, I realized I had just finished a project at the company that I was leading, and I thought, no, this is the right time. If I don't leave now, probably I will never leave. So I took the plunge back then. This was at the end of 2018. I gave my notice, and so now basically more than 5 years ago. And back then, I had no clue exactly what I was going to be doing. I'm happy to elaborate now then on the journey since then. But this basically was the background of how I took the plunge.
Yeah, and I remember reading back then your Medium post, which kind of
Hmm.
got viral. You know how you left. I think it was like 500K compensation at the AWS
Hmm. Yeah.
to do something that was more fulfilling to you, and it looked like at that time you didn't know possibly yet what you would do, but you wanted to do something on your own, right? And And fast forward today, you run a community, which is the Small Bets community. But I remember at the beginning, I took your Twitter course. I think it was one of the very first things that you do by
Yeah.
yourself. So you did a number of projects, right, that eventually got into this larger philosophy and product, which is the Small Bets community today.
Right. Yeah. So actually, I think I started almost on the wrong foot, right? Because I got inspired a lot by the indie hackers
Yeah.
culture of bootstrapping projects, and I treated it. Maybe this was my mistake of interpreting it wrong, but my interpretation was, the bootstrappers are just picking, a project that they think there's a market opportunity for, and then they just you just work hard on it, right? You keep improving, keep building features, keep listening to customers, and eventually you will succeed, right? Eventually destiny will reward you for the hard work.
Yeah.
And actually this was very similar to all my experience up to that point
Mm.
working at other companies. At other companies, you start a new year, your boss tells you, these are the goals for the company. You there's a deadline, and you work every day. You work harder to reach those goals, to reach those targets, and if you get them, you're rewarded. You might get promoted, or you get a raise, and so on and so forth. And that has been sort of my career and many people's sort of approach, right, to
Yeah.
working when you have a regular job. And when I jumped into self-employment, I treated it the same way. I said, I'm going to pick a goal, I'm going to pick a target, and I'm going to work hard towards it. And eventually, the market will reward me. And in hindsight, that was a very foolish mistake. Right? So actually, my very first project was a software business called Userbase. It still exists
Mm.
at userbase.com. This was a little bit nowadays. The Supabase is the equivalent thing. It was a similar idea, like sort of a serverless database, mostly focused for front-end developers without having to set up things. My background was in building databases and the API service. I thought it was an excellent opportunity. I saw the need. I thought I had the skills, and I started working on it. And I spent 9 months, 100% working on it. I even hired another person to help me, spending money out of my own pocket. I thought I was doing all the right things. I was building in public. I was giving access to beta customers and getting feedback, and I was getting all those right signals. And I launched it. 9 months later, it was number one on Product Hunt, front page on Hacker News, lots of attention. The launch tweet got like 500,000 impressions, lots of attention, all the good stuff, all the good signals. But
Yeah.
then, unfortunately, right, all of that didn't really materialize. I mean, I got still a few hundred customers, but it wasn't enough money. At one, I realized that I
Mm.
had spent almost a year. I had wiped out almost a quarter of my savings, right? And I had a business that was making very little money, making like $2,000 a month, relatively speaking. Right? It wasn't enough for me to live and to
Yeah.
to sort of pay all the bills. So at that point, I started thinking, okay, now I have two decisions. Either I continue to double down on this project and continue to improve it, hoping that something changes, right, and
Yeah.
it becomes profitable before I run out of money, right?
Yeah.
Or else I just need to do something else, because the prospect of me spending, 2-3 years on this project, wiping out all my savings, and then having to go to a full-time job was actually quite scary. I didn't
Yeah.
want that to happen. I was enjoying this new lifestyle now of working on my own. I didn't want this to be taken away from me. So then, basically, I had a bit of a crisis of anxiety in that moment, and it sort of finally I had a bit of an epiphany. I said, "Look, okay, I don't really care whether I make money from user base or from whatever. I just need to make this lifestyle sustainable now." And I started thinking, okay, what are the lowest hanging fruit for me to
Mm.
start making some money? Not in 6 months, not in a year, but like this month. I remember this was September, October of 2019. And I thought, how can I make at least, $5,000 this month? What are my options? And I started thinking, maybe the easiest thing would be to do some freelancing on the side, part-time, few hours a month. I started scrolling to my contact list on my phone, and I got one small gig, and it was starting to, get me some income. And that immediately gave me a lot of peace of mind. It changed my perspective completely, because now I felt, okay, I have some income coming in. I could take more hours if I wanted to. I could find more clients. So
Yeah.
suddenly, all that anxiety almost went away. And then very quickly, immediately after the following month, I had built a little bit of a small audience on Twitter. It wasn't crazy big, like I had about 4 or 5 thousand followers as I was building in public, as I was documenting what I was doing for user base. And at the time, I had a thread that went a bit viral. Like it was about AWS, like how to use the good parts of AWS and ignore all the other sort of 180 services that you probably don't
Yeah.
need. And it's
Endless.
got like
Yeah.
2,000 likes. And not just the virality, but I got also a lot of questions about it. People were DMing me and replying,
Mm.
what do you think about RDS versus DynamoDB? What do you think about this versus that? What should I use? And I was noticing that there were interest in people to learn from me how to decide about this daunting big topic. And I
Hmm.
thought, what if I were, actually, I saw someone else, do a self-published book on a similar topic, and I thought, I wonder if I could write a short book about the good parts of AWS. In fact, that's what the book ended up being called. And I set a target of a month. I was thinking in months back then, like, I mean, what I can do this month. Set a target on a month, create a very short book, again, like 70 pages, nothing, and, not even, big fonts, narrow,
Yeah.
narrow margins, kind of, easy to read, probably can be read all in less than an hour. And I put a brain dump of what I thought about all these topics that people were asking me about. And it was done in a month. I put it out there on Twitter, and the first day it made about $5,000 in sales, which might not
Wow.
sound like life-changing money or whatever, but it was incredibly motivating because it opened my eyes, and I said, "Wow! I mean, this made more money up to that point than this project that I had spent." This might sound insane, but I had spent 9 months working on it and almost $100,000 out of my own pocket with employees, the security reviews, whatever I had spent. And I was started thinking maybe I should do more of this stuff, right?
Mm.
More content. I was thinking already of writing a sequel for the AWS book, and not just one sequel. I was thinking of writing like 10 many other books like
Yeah.
it, right? Diving deep into all these chapters that I touched on briefly. And like I went to bed that night thinking, there's all these opportunity now, and it really changed my perspective. Eventually, all these sequels didn't really happen, right? Because I stumbled into other opportunities. But you mentioned the Twitter course. That was something that happened a couple of months later, because then people were asking me again, like, how did you build your audience on Twitter? I'm an engineer like you. I never thought you could go from 0 to 10,000 followers so quickly. What do you tweet about? What do you avoid? And sort of same formula. I put
Yeah.
my lessons into a short product. This time was a recorded course that I promoted. That course is quite insane. That course made over $300,000. I mean, it's been 4 years now, but
Wow.
mostly all of it in the first year or two. Probably the most ROI in terms of time spent
Yeah.
versus money made that I've ever made, and probably that I will ever make, because it
Yeah.
took about 16 hours to put together and to prepare everything from the landing page to the product to promoting it. That's very, very insane. So, I know it may be a long rant, right? But sort of this had been my journey of how I stumbled into, rather than trying to imagine what my ideal business should be, I'm now more open to embracing the randomness of the world, right? And do small projects, take what works, throw away the rest, and proceed with that process, right? Rather than top down, this is what I should do, and then you just put your blinders on and just
Yeah.
focus 100% on one thing.
Yeah. So, and I think that's how we get to the small bets philosophy, right? So, trying different things, probably, you tell me if I'm saying this right, rather than putting all your eggs in one basket and risking it
Yes.
all. And which doesn't necessarily mean, because I know many refer to it for startups and venture capitalists, but it's also about having a long, continuous, unique career in a single specific domain, or having one single side project, like you said about user base. So it's about diversifying the things that you do, basically.
Yes, so exactly, right? So I realized as I was going through this journey, right, that my previous career was very predictable. As I said before, we call it the career ladder when you're working higher up in a
Yeah.
regular career. Ladder implies the predictability. You're going up one
Linear.
rung after the
Yeah.
other, linear. And all my life, I had lived a linear career, like even actually starting from school. From kindergarten, even, right? You sort of keep going level by level up, grade by grade up. Sometimes you have a test. If you pass, you get to the next level up. You join a career, you keep going level up. It's almost like a video game. When you get a certain score, you level up. Once you're on the market, those rules don't apply. There's all sorts of randomness and opacity and complexity because for something to succeed, a business to succeed, right, to pay off, it relies on human behavior, how humans
Hmm.
will perceive it, whether you convince or persuade humans to give you some of their hard-earned money, and nobody really has managed to reverse engineer how humans behave. And actually, even in hindsight, I worked for a decade at AWS, one of the most successful enterprise business ever. Right? It's regarded as one of the most profitable, successful of our time.
Yeah.
But from the inside, I saw that AWS, despite having all the resources that you can imagine, the smartest people you can think of, business leaders like Jeff Bezos, and again, all these people who are regarded as geniuses, access to customer data, relationships, brand name, and whatever, all the resources, all the advantages. Still, AWS was a portfolio of small experiments of
Mm.
nowadays 200 services. And without violating my NDA, only a handful are really paying off, right? Without specifying which ones they are. The rest are just breaking even, some losing money,
Yeah.
some experiments that never really got anywhere. And that
Yeah.
makes you think. And actually, this is very similar. This is not something novel. Book publishers work the same way. They publish many books because they don't know, despite publishers have been in the industry for hundreds of years, some of them, they still can't
Yeah.
predict whether which is going to be the next Harry Potter. So they publish many, they invest only a small amount in each because they can't go in at one thing. And then sometimes, a few become bestsellers, the others break even or just lose a little bit of money. Venture capitalists in Silicon Valley work exactly the same way. They diversify their bit of portfolio. So it started to look to me like I should operate like a VC, but for my own ideas.
Yeah.
A VC would never, even if you go to a VC, even if you impress them a lot, they will never say, I'm going to liquidate all my investments and go 100% into you. They're not
Yeah.
fools, right? They know that there's a high degree of randomness, that they can't really predict what will work and what not. They might be genuinely bullish on your idea, but at
Yeah.
most, they might cite you a slightly bigger check than usual. But still, there's going to be a limit, a budget, an appetite for risk into that one thing.
Yeah.
And then they're diversified, they have a portfolio, they make the portfolio work for them. So if I look back in the past 5 years, now I had a portfolio of different things. Freelancing, I kept doing it for a while, for about 3 years, right? I had software projects, information projects, communities, right? All different things. Some things work. At one point, I was even making handmade cutting boards. Believe it
Yeah.
or not, I got into woodworking and I sold about $15,000 worth of cutting boards. It didn't really work out as a sustainable business for various reasons, but to show the degree of breadth that I was considering.
Yeah.
And right now, my most successful project in the present at 2024 is the Smart Best community. But if we were having this conversation 2 years ago, I wouldn't have even imagined that I would be hosting a community, organizing live events, and all this stuff. It wasn't even on my radar,
Yeah.
which shows me even more so how you have to embrace randomness here. Like maybe in 2026, I might be doing, actually, very likely, I might be doing something different or getting most of my income from something else. And that's
Yeah.
okay, right? And that's a very different perspective, I think, that people underappreciate about navigating uncertainty.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible story. You know, the counter argument for that by many people would be if you focus on one thing or, 80% of your time on one thing, you can achieve more, right? Some would say you can make this thing that maybe now is a side project together with other projects that you do in this big portfolio. You can make it 10 times bigger if you focus mostly on this. Do you think about it sometimes when it comes to your projects, or is it different for you?
No, no. So look, I don't disagree, right? And this is probably quite very obvious that if you focus more on one thing, you can increase its upside. But I'm mostly focused on the downside, right? I'm mostly focusing on doing things that will very reliably allow me to continue to live the self-employed lifestyle. So yes, look, it's funny with user base, right? Because just after I decided to abandon the idea of user base and not giving my attention, Supabase came out, and it was basically a state competitor, and it took off. It's doing well, apparently, even though it's VC backed and whatever. But it's interesting. It tells me that the idea had potential, and maybe in another parallel universe,
Yeah.
I could have doubled down, and this could have made a lot of money and be super successful and whatever. But still, I don't regret the decision, because the more likely outcome would have been me spending 2 or 3 more years on that thing and wiping out all my savings and having to go back to a full-time job and back to square one with no savings. So now I'm basically, sometimes I joke tweet, but it's not really a joke, where my only business plan is to avoid having to go back to a full-time job. Like, I'm making decisions that increase my chances of sustaining the lifestyle that I already have. And this might sound like a subtle thing, maybe just arguing semantics, but it actually changes your decisions drastically. Yes, I'm absolutely 100% cutting my upside significantly. The things that I'm doing are not unlikely going to make millions or have some exponential growth or be acquired for millions or have some
Mm-hmm.
big exit or whatever. I'm cognizant. But the things that I'm doing, I feel like even if everything I'm doing were to go to zero tomorrow and I had to start over, I can start again with these low hanging fruit, still keep
Yeah.
my independence, which is what I. This is why I took the plunge. I had left a cushy
Yeah.
job. I was being treated well. I left it because I wanted more freedom, more independence. Keep my independence while still earning enough, right, to pay the bills, and live a comfortable life. Basically,
Okay.
that's my answer. That is more downside. Take care of the downside. That is a common saying in business. Take care of the
Yeah.
downside and let the upside take care of itself. There's many similar analogies, like in sports and Formula One. You have to win the race. You have to finish the race, right? It's important to have a reliable car and not get into an accident. To
Yeah.
to thrive, you must first survive. All
Yeah.
similar ideas, that you have to be in the game. You have to make sure that you're maximizing the odds. It's funny, right? I got a little bit inspired by the preppers, the survivalists. Right? Some people see these people as ridiculous,
Yeah.
paranoid about the zombie apocalypse, but actually, I really start to see that there's a overlap in philosophy. Those people are paranoid maybe about something, maybe irrational, whatever, the zombie apocalypse, World War III, or some volcano eruption, but that they prep, they build their bunker,
Yeah.
whatever. I'm doing a little bit about the same thing with my business and my self-employment, trying to build my own prepper backpack
Yeah.
and my own bunker, metaphorically, by wanting to stay in this game like this. I basically want to continue to live the way I'm living now, and the decisions I make are about that rather than maximizing the upside. Look,
I
one final thing. If I wanted to maximize the most money that I could make in my career, my best bet would have been to stay at my full-time job, because certainly still haven't by far made, not even reached the same level, but not to mention that it's been 5 years that I was earning
mm,
significantly less, right? So just to recoup that, it's already a
yeah.
big barrier,
Yeah.
right? So that's probably the better way.
I love the analogy with preppers and survivalists. I would call it the survivalist entrepreneur, probably
Yeah, great. Yeah, I
as
like
an
it that
approach. Yeah,
actually.
yeah. We could write
Yeah.
like a book called like that.
Yes.
So one thing I was thinking while you were thinking about the downsides, thinking about keeping your current lifestyle as your top priority, right? That I think it's a very practical and mature mindset about
Hmm.
to think about your life. But my
Hmm.
question would be, has it always been like that? That is, many people think about career ladders and achieving more and
Hmm.
more, and they're not happy with themselves until
Yeah.
they don't even know, right? I mean, they want to do more and more. So and so when you went from working in big tech to work for yourself on
Hmm.
your projects, did it take also for you to shift your mindset somewhat to think about what you are going to achieve in life, your own identity. Did you have any kind of struggle, or did everything come natural to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think it wasn't always the way. I would say that I applied to work at Amazon primarily because I felt like I was missing out from a
Yeah,
learning perspective. I wanted to see how the sausage is made
yeah.
at a big tech company, and I was using AWS back then, 2000, long time ago, now 2008, 2009. I was a fan, and it felt like this would give me a lot. And I worked hard a lot in the first couple of years there. I have to admit, I was only focusing on, working hard, hitting the targets and whatever. I think probably what changed for me was having kids, right? And
Mm,
suddenly it starts to open your eyes, like, okay, what am I trading off, right? And then sort of very, very quickly you start to realize. I think probably a bit of an epiphany that I had was at one point I was meeting with some friends and whatever, and you start seeing people who I know who might be less ambitious career-wise and maybe not making as much money as I was doing, not having as prestigious levels or titles, and I was asking myself like, what do I have that they don't have? And actually, I was thinking probably they have more freedom and and better lifestyle than I do. I remember at the point I was carrying my pager with me. I was on call, my laptop in my backpack because we had these periods where if something goes wrong, I had to jump on it. And I was thinking, look, these people they have a house like me, they have a car like me, they have kids like me. They're probably earning a tenth of I was
mm,
making, but probably they're living a better life. And that sort of messed up with me quite a bit. I mean, it wasn't jealousy, right? Because basically a reset of what's the point of all of this. And to be fair, my selfish, satisfaction of learning how AWS work, big techs work was satisfied in the first couple of years. I got that, right? The addition, staying an additional year, more years wasn't really adding much more. I got what I wanted. So at the end of the day, it basically became, I'm staying because it's making a lot of money. It's a cushy job. It's the default path. Um, but what am I trading off? That I was leaving home at 7 a.m. in the morning, coming home back tired. This was pre-pandemic, not working from home. Coming home tired at like seven, close to dinner time, 6, 7 p.m. Barely spending any time with my family. If I want to spend some time off, I had to see if I could take time off. And that's when I started to thinking, like, what's the point of all of this, right?
yeah,
And sort of event now, I really believe, right, that especially at least at some point in your life, it should be lifestyle first, and that's how I treat my businesses as well. Like, I really believe, you start a business or you do a business because you want to improve your lifestyle. If it's harming your lifestyle, like, what's the point, right? I mean, our work should be working for us. It's a means to an end to improve our lifestyles and the lifestyles of our family.
yeah.
And sort of that's how I see it right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I've asked this question because I've gone through a similar transition in the sense that I've been a VC-backed founder for many years.
Hmm.
Then I was briefly a manager in a larger company, and then I went full time in the newsletter and now also the community. And I
Hmm.
remember, feeling that I had my own identity tied to this idea
Hmm.
of building a big business, right? I mean, feeling
Yeah.
like I'm a founder, I have to build this $1 billion
Hmm.
business, but then coming gradually to terms with the fact that I was enjoying the lifestyle, I was liking to see the impact firsthand of what I was doing, to work on my
Hmm.
own terms, and and it was gradual to me. But I don't have kids, so
Yeah.
I think everybody finds I mean these north stars, but I think that lifestyle and coming to the point where you maybe even yourself better, and you know what lifestyle suits you more than when you were
Absolutely.
younger. Yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely. You mentioned, you brought up a good point about the labels, I call them, like calling
yeah,
yourself a founder, a programmer, engineer,
yeah.
whatever. And I think it's a very insidious trap, right, that keeps people
I
stuck
agree.
into these. And actually, I'm careful psychologically about myself to not describe myself, not even as an entrepreneur, whatever. I don't want to be called And well, don't get me wrong. I can't control what people call me, and I'm fine with whatever label they give me. But me myself, I don't think of myself anymore of a programmer, an engineer, entrepreneur, whatever. Maybe the only thing I call myself is self-employed because that's just a
Yeah.
reality, right? But I try to avoid the labels to avoid me pigeonholing myself subconsciously to I should only be doing this thing. There was
Yeah.
an old Derek Sivers post, I think from about 10 years ago, where he talked about this, right? Where, should I call myself a musician? Should I call myself a programmer? But I haven't programmed for 5 years. Why should I call myself a programmer? He was reflecting on almost the absurdity of labels, right?
Yeah.
And like, who cares, right?
Yeah.
What I should be called. I mean, certainly we have backgrounds and experiences. That's the past; those are facts. But we should feel the liberty, right, to change directions and do whatever we want to do. And it's very liberating, I think, once you
Yeah.
look. I understand the difficulty, right? Sometimes in society, I go to the dentist and I get asked like, "What do you do for a living? What do you work on?" And it's very hard to give an answer. It was easy
Or
when I said I'm
family
a programmer at
dinners
Amazon.
for me.
Yeah, family dinners, exactly these kinds of things. So there are some challenges, but they're a minor nuisance, right? I'd
Yeah.
still rather be disciplined. Again, this is why I like the idea of a VC for your own ideas. Like the VC, they have a title of VC, they're an investor, and I consider myself investing my time instead of investing
Yeah.
others people's money in my projects. But the VC, again, like they don't define themselves by the label, right? The VC,
Yeah.
Y Combinator, or I don't know,
Yeah.
funded Stripe or whatever. They don't call themselves, the Stripe or whatever, right? They're investors of capital. I'm an investor of my time in a
Yeah.
similar way. Right.
Love
Of
the
course, this doesn't work in family dinners, right? But at least with me, it's how I
yeah,
see
but
it.
it doesn't solve family dinners. It's still
Yeah.
an ongoing project for me to figure
Problem.
out what
Yes.
to call myself. But yes. So speaking of lifestyle, we speak about being free to spend your time the way you like. What does your lifestyle looks like right now? That is, if you have a
Yeah.
portfolio of projects, how do you think about allocating your time on them? Do you have like
Yeah.
fixed things, or based on whatever needs the most of your attention at a given time? What do you do?
No, great question. I think probably the major difference between now and when I was employed, and this was probably why employment wasn't the right fit for me, is that I find myself working with the seasons, I like to call it, not necessarily with with Earth's seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, but with the idea that I go into bursts and lows, right? Where there are periods where I basically do nothing, right? There are periods, especially in summer, it happens to be kids are at home, whatever, that I maybe answer emails, I spend 30 minutes a day, answer support, whatever, but I'm not creative, I'm not building anything, I'm not thinking about anything, things are just running on autopilot. And then I go into periods, 1 month, 2 month chunks of high intensity. And these are driven not on a schedule, but because I stumble into an opportunity and I say, wow, this is great. And then I go high intensity on it, right? So I'm not like context switching every day on different things. Like some people think, I do 10 minutes on one thing and I do 10 minutes on another. Not really, right? It's more about what we discussed before, right? Not having the label and
Yeah,
allowing me to jump onto opportunities regardless of what field, whatever, what label, what category they are. But at least my work arrangements right now is highly unstructured, right?
yeah,
So no fixed hours, no fixed times, no fixed number of hours. I play it by ear. I like waking up in the morning. It's morning time for me here, right? And after this interview, I have nothing scheduled, and I could decide to spend it any way I want to, based on, or not spend it at all, right?
yeah,
Or just it's sunny here in the Pacific Northwest. It's not sunny often at the time of the. Maybe I just go out for a walk or go for a run, and the sun gets some vitamin D, and that would be the decision for the day. And I
yeah,
literally enjoy that. I enjoy that I have no long-term commitments, no obligations, and the day is just a lot of options. And it
yeah,
might be that I invested into improving something in the small bets community because there's a whole catalog of things that I want to be improving. or considering some new idea, or talking or going on Twitter and documenting something that I'm doing, or again, or just not doing anything, just spend some time on my own or with my family, and so on
Yeah.
and so forth. Right. So this is the main difference, and this is why, like, full-time employment never let me do this. No matter how much I got promoted, no matter how much money I was making, no matter even if I moved companies. Maybe there are some companies that are a bit more flexible, but still, there's this expectation that you follow a rigid
Yeah.
structure. Right. The thing that killed, probably, I think that I disliked most working as an engineer at tech is like the daily stand-ups, where you have to explain what you did yesterday and what you are going to do the day before. Because I really don't work that way. I don't
Yeah.
work in a way where there's something that I had something to say about yesterday. Sometimes I just have
Yeah.
nothing to say. I didn't do anything. I wasn't feeling inspired. And that's, I understand companies. Like, I mean, it's hard to manage a business, a company, or a team where people just work when they're inspired. Like, how do you know when things are
Yeah.
going together? So I appreciate the challenge, not blaming them. It's just incompatible with my own preference. And I
Yeah.
actually think, just to conclude, that I think that it's just a matter of preferences. Strongly believe there are people who wouldn't be able to work if they don't have some structure. And actually, even if they become self-employed,
Mm, mm, mm,
probably
mm, mm.
they prefer to have the structure of, even though nobody's making me do it, I'm still going to work 9 to 5, go into an
Yeah.
office, shut the door, take a break in the middle, and that's sort of, and then close my laptop, and that's it. I don't work that way. Right? I work whenever I feel that inspiration, and I don't. And this is something I had to learn, right? Because at first I was feeling guilty, not working. But now, if there's nothing to do, I just don't do anything. Right? I'm
Yeah.
not wasting time or energy
Yeah,
on.
and I think it's very important what you said, not feeling guilty, right? For example,
Mhm.
I see about myself that I perform, let's say, better under constraints, right? And so I
Yeah.
sometimes try to put myself under even artificial constraints and deadlines,
Yeah.
and I feel this pressure of feeling that I'm productive, that I'm creating things. So
Hmm.
don't you ever? I realize that I'm asking you the questions that I ask to myself, so so
Yes.
we can compare notes. Don't you ever, with this unstructured schedule, fear that you end up becoming more lazy,
Yeah. Yeah.
or end up producing less and less over time because you're not used anymore to high energy work, or you don't even care about that at some point because that's
No,
where
no,
an
absolutely.
answer.
No,
Yeah,
excellent question. So, two things. First, on the constraints, I employ that a lot. And actually, the way I work usually is that as soon as I decide I'm going to do something, I immediately think of, I have to do this by tonight or by
yeah,
tomorrow. And sort of that, like you, actually, I go even further. I'm almost incapable of working if I don't have a pressing constraint.
yeah,
Like, I just can't function. I need to say, this needs to be done like within an hour. I keep track, very short term. Like, and I chunk things down, small things that I know I have to do with a certain time. So that's one thing about the getting lazy and getting complacent. It's and this is what gave me the peace of mind and not feeling guilty, is that I'm now relying on the stressor of waiting until I need to do something, right? And let me
mm,
explain, right? Sort of, um, I could take my income line, my income chart, right? Every month I keep track of how much money the business made and I made,
sure,
right? And if it's going well, right? If it looks like made enough money, trending the right way, I'm starting to feel like I don't need to do anything. Like, let's ride the wave, right? But then eventually, right, because there's always, you need to improve, things usually don't just go on autopilot unless you're very lucky. Things start to trend down. And as I start to see the thing trending down, it's very easy to notice with your eyes that it's going to go to zero at some point. And that's the stressor that puts the fire under me and makes me think, well, actually, I need to do something, right? And I start to wait until I start to feel that positive stressor, right?
mm,
And similarly to the deadlines, I'm now almost incapable of being creative, being productive, unless I feel I need to. And
yeah,
I honestly, to go a bit philosophical, I think this is actually probably wired in our DNA. Right? Our ancestors of just a few generations ago were hunter-gatherers living in the forests, waking up in the morning. They had to go hunt or gather food to sustain themselves. There was no idea of working for working's sake,
Yeah.
right? You worked whenever food was running low, and if
Yeah.
you have enough food, there was actually no point in overworking because the food would probably rot and not be useful, right? So I think I'm discovering probably what's still in my DNA of what's the point of overworking if things are going well, and then I wait until I get that natural signal, right? The lion feels hungry, it goes to
Yeah.
hunt. You don't need to force the lion to go hunt. And basically I'm feeling the same thing. And primarily I check my income chart, like I do a quick P&L at the end of the month to see where things are going. And I wait again until I start to feel that stressor, that I need to change course, I need to adjust course, I need to start considering some new opportunity, or I need to start getting some more attention to the business, or I need to do some promotion, right, to change the direction. If not,
Yeah.
I take it easy. That's the time to take a season off, to spend some more time with my family, or to spend time with my hobbies. I talked about woodworking before and whatever. I picked that up because at one point things were going well, and I started thinking, I'd like to make some furniture for the house,
Yeah.
and that's how one of
Yeah.
my hobbies started.
Yeah, I think that taking extended time off and even and not only that, but doing many different things, very different things, like doing
Mhm.
woodworking that has very little overlap, with tech, has
Yeah,
even hidden benefits. It's like you can draw, correlations between things and being more creative in
yeah,
finding
so
solutions. It's like it resets your brain. I mean, I can think of periods of my life where I was working at many different things, and I really sense it that changing mode of operations completely and working on this thing, which was very, very different, like trying to record something with my band, and then the
mhm.
next hour doing something with software was kind of beneficial because you would get more creative with some things. So I don't know if you ever get to experience that.
No, no, absolutely. And I think primarily again, it's maybe not necessarily learning new things, but avoiding, putting
Tunnel
yourself in a
vision.
bubble. The
Yeah.
tunnel vision, exactly. It helps you avoid tunnel vision. I think that's the benefit you get, even if you don't get anything that overlap and you can reuse. Is breaking out of that matrix that you
Yeah.
put yourself, which is
Yeah.
almost always maybe not necessarily harmful, but not beneficial to just be tunnel visioned onto one thing. You
Yeah.
stop, you stop seeing even, you stop understanding yourself as well, right? Because um, we mentioned woodworking, for example. Something I learned is, the way I like to do woodworking projects is very different than how I like to work, say, on tech, right? I can't, if I'm coding something, I can immerse myself into it and spend hours and lose track of time and just, I work hard until I finish. With woodworking, I can't do that. Like, I mean, I could do it, but it burns me out quicker. Maybe it's because it's more physical. You stand on your own feet, loud, dusty environment. I need to take more frequent breaks and I need to chunk the work differently. And this made me realize about myself, something about myself, right? That it really depends on the kind of thing I'm doing, right? And I need a different work arrangement,
Yeah.
depending on the activity itself. So yeah, you learn more about your preferences,
Yeah.
your what you're good at, what you're not good at, right? And many other things. Like again, like
Yeah.
to keep using with woodworking, noticed I like creating new projects, but for example, if I'm trying to make a chair for a dining table, I will have fun making the first chair. But then, if once I realize I need to make three other chairs,
Not fun
I start
anymore.
putting it off. Not fun anymore, and that's interesting. It's something that, and there are people who I
Yeah.
think they are complete opposite. That actually, I just want to repeat the same thing, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is just a personal preference, not good or bad.
Yeah.
But and this starts to relate to even with customer support. So as with my business, in the beginning, you start almost enjoying customer support. You're getting feedback. You're satisfying customers. But then once it starts to get repeated, you start, starts becoming annoying, like doing the fourth chair in
Yeah.
woodworking. And then you start thinking, okay, can I automate it? Can I delegate it? Can I do something about it? And it's good to learn these things. Going back to, I don't want to fight my nature. I talked about my DNA, hunter gatherers. It's a bit of speculation about how I think my nature is. I like to live my life as much as possible without fighting my
Yeah.
own nature, my own preferences, right? Rather than always struggling and fighting with my brain and my
Yeah,
body.
yeah, I totally agree. So I was thinking that people who listen to us and watch this interview are engineers and managers, and they hear this story and they might ask themselves, is this for me? Right? Does this
Hmm.
approach make sense for my life? And probably, how do I get there? Right? So
Yeah.
we have heard your story, how you left AWS and you made it, quote unquote, right?
Hmm.
You are now like 5 years into this. So do you have any advice for how to do a similar transition well? That is, would you do something different from how you did it or originally?
Yes. So about the first part of the question, whether this is for me or not, I think it's important to try to understand your preferences, as we talked about before, right? Do you feel like you need structure to flourish, to be productive? Do you feel that you need to have a very clear list of things you need to do, clear objectives, clear goals? Because I think if you jump into self-employment like I'm doing, that is going to be very hard if
Mm,
you need the structure, right? There are other types of self-employment like freelancing, right, where you
mhm.
might replicate the same structure, because after the initial part of getting a pipeline of clients that you can settle into a routine. That's certainly different forms. And actually, I mean, you have more experience than me, but maybe starting a VC-backed business might be even more structured because you get investors. There's almost like a playbook of that you need to play, right? And there are clear goals, clear targets, and whatever. But doing like what I did is probably the most, or maybe one of the more extreme ways of having to deal with uncertainty, not knowing what I'm going to be working on, what I'm going to be doing. The future is very much uncertain, even though it's working now. The future is still very unlikely. So I think it's good to try to gauge where you are with that, right? But
Yeah.
um, uh, jumping into this, that if you think like me, right, if you start to notice the signs that the structure is not for me, you dislike the daily stand-ups, you dislike having to ask
Especially
for
the daily
permission.
stand-ups.
Yes, especially those things. Like, those are the signals, right? They're having to justify what you did, having to work on somebody else's terms, asking for permission, purposeless work, eating you out, whatever. What I would recommend doing. So I certainly I did a mistake in the beginning, as I mentioned at first, right? Like treating it like another project at my company. Highly advised not to fall into the same step. My advice is to start with low-hanging fruit. Now just think
Mm,
of
yeah.
what's a small project I could do this month, right, or next month, that could return me $1,000. It's not about $1,000. It's not going to change your life. You're not going to pay your mortgage for that month, whatever. It's about having a small win. I strongly
Yeah.
believe that the best way now of taming uncertainty is actually this very different than the VC culture, right? Instead of shooting for the moon or shooting for the stars and landing on the moon or whatever the saying is actually go for the low-hanging fruit. It might not sound ambitious. Try to get a small win. Sell something to strangers, to 10
Yeah.
strangers, right? And make $1,000 or even $500. Because once you do get that small win, the next step, doing something slightly bigger, trying to make $5,000 now, is going to be exponentially easier for various reasons. One, because you become more comfortable, more confident. You learn more about yourself, you learn more about what you're good at or what you're not good at, what you dislike, what you like. You build some relationships with a few people, you get some testimonials, you build some reputation, you have emails of customers that already bought something from you, right? It's they say success brings with it more success. It sounds like a negative thing. In fact, politicians use this as a negative. The rich gets
Mm,
richer and so on and so
yeah.
forth, but actually the same idea applies to starting small, right? And small things tend to be, even though we talk about uncertainty, randomness, opacity, and hard to predict what will work and what won't,
Yeah.
smaller things are still slightly more predictable, right? Look, let's take writing a book, right? I managed to make some money from writing books. Writing books is considered as one of the most speculative ways of making money. It's incredibly hard. There are statistics about how, the average income of book authors is like $2,000 per year or something very, very low because of this power law dynamic where almost all
Yeah.
the earnings are made by the top 1% and everyone else makes almost nothing. But if you choose to ignore the publishing route and the typical way of writing books and do a tiny book, not something you spent you put all your life's work into, but basically converting some knowledge in your head into a PDF, and you try to self-publish it on, say, Amazon KDP, which allows you
Yeah.
to put a PDF, and you have now a short book on the Amazon search results. This is a relatively easy way, relatively
Yeah.
speaking, right, of getting a small win.
Yeah.
It's a reliable way of making a few $100s a month or something in that ballpark from something that you might spend just a week producing.
Yeah.
Again, like it might sound $100 a month. How is that motivating? It's not about that. It's about once you do it once, then you can do it twice, 3 times, 4 times. The more you do it, then the more you increase your chances that one of them might take off. Like what happened with my Twitter course. Like I had a text with a friend of mine just the day before I launched it, thinking, I'm certain this is not going to do very well. It turned out that for various reasons, I think it was the timing, basically, right? I mean, this was in the pandemic, start of the pandemic. I didn't
Mm.
time it intentionally; it just was an accident. April 2020,
Yeah.
where everyone was locked inside, and people were losing their jobs, were trying to do more creator economy stuff, and this thing came out, and for some reason it just blew
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Look, I wish I knew how to replicate that project because I would do 10 more of it. I don't know. The only way I know is to continue to do other things like it, right?
Many other
And
things.
other small projects, right?
Yeah.
Many, again, like portfolio approach, basically,
Yeah.
which goes back to this is the same thing book publishers do, VCs do, movie studios and Hollywood do, right? It's a tried and true way of making the highly unpredictable a bit more predictable.
Yeah.
Saying many small things, not investing too much, focusing on the downside, taking what works, throwing away the rest, going after small wins, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So basically the advice is start small, don't go all in. Just like you
Yeah.
don't want to go all in with your normal career, you don't want to go all in all at once
Hmm.
with self-employment. Probably start with the side project and then possibly over time do many of them to increase the chance of success. Have you found that you got better over time with picking good ideas that are more likely to be successful? Do you have any
Oh,
advice
yeah.
on where to look at for
Yes.
good side projects?
Absolutely. I like to call this my selection criteria, right? And certainly it improved over time, partly again learning more about what I'm good at and what I'm not, or what I'm less good at. Like I gave you the example of I tried to sell handmade cutting boards,
Yeah.
which was a bit foolish in hindsight because, like I told you, I hate repeating things. And like the first order was fun, the third, fourth order was like a chore,
Not
and
scalable.
so not well, yeah, like not. I'm okay with not scalable things. Like the work I do in the community now is not very scalable, but it's different. It's stimulating. There's still something, right? So I think a good selection criteria for finding things that will likely work or not is to have an expectation, right? It's a bit like the scientific methods, right? To use a bit of an imperfect analogy, if I'm trying to measure the force of gravity in a vacuum at sea level,
Mhm.
I will start with an expectation that this should be 9.8 meters per second squared, and I do the experiment and I try to prove that my theory is correct. And I think I like to do the same with business ideas. As soon as I get inspired that maybe this is a good side project, I start to think, okay, what's an expectation that would make me satisfied in terms of financial return? If I make $1,000 from this thing once, like
Mm.
lifetime, would it be good enough? If I make $10,000, would that be enough? Like, what's the line?
Yeah.
And once I do choose a line, then I start to think, what needs to happen for this expectation to become a reality? Let's say my expectation is to make $10,000 from this project that I'm going to work on for a week, right? And I'm going to be selling this thing for $10. It means I need to find 1,000 customers. What do I need to find 1,000 customers? What access
Yeah.
do I have? Maybe I'm expecting people to be Googling for a problem, and then my product will go in the search results. So now I'm asking myself, okay, let me use one of the analytical SEO tools to try to understand how many people are searching for this term. If I see that there's like only 10 searches a month, right, and the top 10 results are very competitive, then it quickly starts telling me, probably this is a not very realistic
Yeah.
expectation. I need to change something. So I keep digging, right, until I'm convinced that my expectation has a fighting chance of happening. And actually, this exercise I think is really good because even if it doesn't happen, sometimes you're still guessing, right? Things. Even if it doesn't happen, you learn more this way. You learn,
Yeah.
okay, I overestimated how easy it's going to be to get into the top 10 results for this keyword, or I overestimated how the conversion rate of how many people will click on the landing page and buy the product, or I underestimated. Sometimes you have positive results and you get something better than you hoped. But if you throw something at the wall and hope that it sticks, that's too naive. Sometimes people
Yeah.
misinterpret my ideas of small bets of, oh yeah, just do random things, throw them at the wall and see what happens. I think that's too naive. It's not, you might get lucky that way, but I think you need to have a bit more rigor in what you choose to do. Because I say is I like to think of myself as a VC for my ideas, but one reality is that a VC might invest in 1,000 businesses. I can't be in 1,000 businesses. I might have 4 or 5 projects, so I think I need to be even more careful with what
Sure.
I choose, right?
Yeah.
So I still don't want to choose things that are going to take time, energy, be disappointing, and as much as I can. Like, you can't avoid it. I had several things that didn't work out, but this has been probably the main thing for me. Right?
Yeah.
Start with an expectation and try to work backwards on have at least a hypothesis of how that expectation is going to become
Yeah.
reality. And you need to be convinced that that hypothesis is viable, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense.
I love that you start with the expectations in mind because I think, of course, they're helpful if the project does not succeed. You learn why the expectations were met, but I think they're useful even if the project exceeds those expectations because, in a way, they keep you grounded.
Yes.
You are
Yeah.
more likely to be grateful of what you achieved because otherwise you may fall into the trap, which is the same trap of your career, the ladder, etc., that you need to do more and more and more. Even with the side project, you need to do more and more.
Yeah.
Instead, you look
Absolutely.
back at your notes and you see, I wanted to make $10,000 with that. I've already made like 30,000. So you're more likely to be grateful about that. I don't know if you experience that with your projects.
100%. You put it perfectly right. No, no, totally. It does make you, and it makes you appreciate the randomness of it all. Again, like I told you with my Twitter course, that thing, because actually I have it explicit. Talking with a friend the day before launch, previously I had my AdWords book, which had already cost 6 figures, and I told my friend, I'm certain this is not going to do as well, but it's probably going to be worth the effort. It was so low expectations, and then the fact that it took off and it's over $200,000 makes you realize how almost impossible it is to predict what will work and what won't. And yeah, it makes you appreciate the noise, the randomness, the inability to predict. And yeah, I don't take that lightly. And I think, like, yeah, it's easy to start fooling yourself that you're good at now. You can do this forever and ever, but realizing that it was a bet and it just paid off, and I couldn't see it coming, yeah, makes you, keeps you honest.
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect closing line about gratefulness and finding happiness this way for this chat. So thank you so much, Daniel, for this chat. I love talking with you today for this interview.
No, thank you, Luca. Very fun talking with you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.